Hi, this is Jeff Lamb. Welcome to my podcast. It's called Losing My Mind. See, I've had this really interesting life so far. I've done things that I couldn't even dream of when I was a kid, dreaming of what my life might be. Well, I figured I better start putting some of these stories down somewhere before I really do lose my mind. These won't be in any particular order, and they're mostly for me, so I don't forget. But you're more than welcome to listen in. Welcome to podcast number 9. I mentioned earlier these would jump around a little bit. Now we're going to go back to the end of Buffalo Dick. We talked about that in a previous episode. Buffalo Dick was scripted by my brother Bob and me, and it was recorded and it was produced. I hadn't done live radio before until about 1983. Remember Pete Cavanaugh, who had invited me to get out of his lobby, had moved down to Toledo, Ohio, and he invited me to come down and do an afternoon radio program. Well, I moved to Toledo, having never done a live radio show. And I lasted, 4 months, 3 months. It was a very short, like a cup of coffee is all I lasted. And I was terrible. I really wasn't cut out for it, the way I was doing it. And I really hadn't had any coaching or counseling on doing live radio. And my final straw that got me fired was I did a Toledo Bag Lady Appreciation Day. Now, there was a Toledo Bag Lady named Elaine. Hollywood casting couldn't have picked a better Toledo Bag Lady. Anyway, I did a search for her. I did an interview with her. I gave her a pack of cigarettes to answer a couple of questions. And then I had a song that I wrote and recorded about her. And the complaints were just massive. And Pete said, well, that's it. We'll make that your last day for now. We'll try to figure something else out. And then he brought Terry Knight down. Terry Knight was the manager of Grand Funk Railroad, and he was also the founder and lead singer of Terry Knight and the Pack. He was also a big DJ on CKLW out of Windsor in the 70s. And so anyway, he put Terry Knight and myself together in my apartment to try to come up with a morning show. Well, Terry was more interested in doing cocaine than he was writing any morning show. But we had a lot of laughs, and he had some amazing stories. Yeah, we didn't really work out too well. So I ended up going back to Flint and hanging out there for a couple of years. Then Pete called me again about 1989, and he said, hey, Jeff, I've got an idea. I need you to come down to Toledo again. So I drove down to see what his idea was. And he matched me up with a guy named Mark Benson. And Mark, just a great guy. Everybody liked Mark. You just instantly do. Even on the air, he's just a friendly, very competent, very good DJ. But he's not a hilarious guy. He's not doing anything terribly unique. He's just really good at basic radio. What I mean by that is he wasn't a character like Wolfman Jack or Cousin Brucey or any of the other DJs that were characters. He was just a good, solid jock. Well, Pete thought, if I put Jeff with him, then we've got something. Jeff can do all the characters, not be Jeff, and Mark can be Mark and kind of be the handoff machine, the quarterback that keeps handing off to all these different characters. And so he sold me on the idea. I moved down here, and under Pete's tutelage, we quickly became the number one morning show in town. Mark had the greatest laugh in the world. Best laugh in radio for sure. And it was very easy to get because he found me very funny. So that was real. That was honest. Every time he was laughing, he meant it. And not everybody thought I was all that funny, but he did. And what Mark did for me was immeasurable. If I came out with a line or a bit that was about a 7 on a 1 to 10, Mark laughing as hard as he did, and as funny as his laugh was, it made the listeners laugh. And it made them think they just heard something that was a 10, not a 7. So he elevated my game by being Mark Benson and being all that he was. And Pete meant it when he said, I don't want any Jeff on the air. He says, you're different when you're Jeff. He says, when you're Jeff, you stammer, well, like I'm doing right now. He says, but when you're a character, you come up with all kinds of things to say right now. They just come out and they keep on coming and they're smooth as can be. But when you're Jeff, it doesn't work that way. So I don't want Jeff, I want the characters. Mark will be the straight guy in the real voice, and you be everybody else. I was having a little trouble coming up with a character for the sports guy. About a minute before I was to do sports, and I was doing sports as Jeff still, because I hadn't come up with that character yet, Pete stuck his head in the studio door and said, Jeff, I want to hear a character do sports on this next sportscast, or we're going to have a conversation when you get off the air. You may be moving back to Flint. And he didn't mean that, but he meant I needed to come up with it. So I'm sitting there, I'm scratching my head. I start the Gillette theme, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I just, in a gruff voice, just went, Good morning, Toledo. And I wasn't copying Robin Williams. I was stretching because I didn't have a name for this guy. I had just come up with a voice instantly. So it ended up being, Good morning, Toledo. Vinny, boom, boom, cappuccino. Let's talk sports. And then I hit the bowling pins. And then I just started rattling off sports scores, and it was terribly irreverent, but it was Vinny. That was Vinny's character was born. He'd say things like, well, the Tigers beat Cleveland like a Sunday morning Woody, 7-2. The Yankees played the Royals, and the Yankees went down like Madonna on prom night, 12-3, and so on. So anyway, that character was born. We had a lot of fun things that we did together on the show. We had some great bits. One of them always just drove people crazy, but it was brilliant in its conception. It was called Stump Knowledge Boy, and people could call in with any kind of question at all. Didn't matter what the question was. They call him with the question, and Mark knew the answer to it because he was Knowledge Boy. And it was a beautiful thing. And here's how it worked. This is how the call went in reality. FM 104, who's this? Yeah, this is Jim from Perrysburg. Yeah, what's your question for Stump Knowledge Boy? When changing a furnace coupler, what are the first 3 steps? I don't know. What? Well, you take the flat rack first, then you use the 2x4, and then you cross it over with the newly, or whatever the answer would have been. And so Mark would just repeat that. He'd say, well, you take the flat rack first, then the 2x4, and then you use the newly. And the guy would always say, yep, yes, that's correct. Any one of those answers. And he was saying, yup, like, well, you repeated that properly. Not, yup, you got it right and you stumped me. Mark would say, okay, you win. You can pick up your Van Halen CD after 9 a.m. Thanks for playing. All right. We taped this during the music. That's when we taped all the calls. And while the music was still playing, we got about 4 or 5 of these calls. And then I got out a razor blade and a grease pencil and I started editing. And I'm literally standing ankle deep in tape after I'm done editing this segment. And then we come back and the call sounded like this on the air. Yeah, FM 104, who's this? Yeah, this is Jim from Perrysburg. Yeah, what was your question for Stump Knowledge Boy? When changing a furnace coupler, what are the first 3 steps? Well, you take the flat rack first, then the 2x4, then you use the newly. Yep, that's it. Next call. It was brilliant. The people playing still got their prize, but they knew the secret. And they thought it was as funny as our regular listeners thought it was amazing. So it was a really good bit, and it worked every time. You may be asking yourself, did you guys ever go too far and get in trouble? Well, yes, we did. One of the things that ended up, it was very popular, and it was tough to explain to the boss, so we just figured it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. So the thing was, it was called Nothing Personal. And we'd get a woman on the phone. It had to be a female. And if we think you're lying, we're going to hang up and you win nothing. But if you answer all the questions, you win a prize pack chosen especially for you. So we'd get the girl on the phone, and she'd agree to answer all of our questions. And then we'd say, how old were you the first time you had sex? What's your bra size? Do you wear underwear? Every once in a while, Mark would chime in, nothing personal. And we'd say, how many guys have you slept with? Have you ever done it in public? Do you own a vibrator? When was the last time you used it for sex? How many times a week do you masturbate? Are you shaved or au naturel? Have you ever cheated on your boyfriend? And they're answering these questions, And we couldn't believe it. The guys that tuned in loved this segment because they were hearing these answers they couldn't believe. And I don't even know if the girls were lying or not. Probably some of them were, but they all were just honest as could be as far as we knew, and that was good enough for us. But if we did something where we stepped over the line a little bit, this was the cool thing about working for Pete Kavanaugh. He came from the talent side or the on-air side of radio as opposed to the sales side of radio. When you're on air, whether it's in TV or radio, you're considered talent. That's what they call you. So he came from talent, and then he got into sales, and then he became a general manager of the station. But because he had been in talent, he understood the concept, and he understood the fragile ego of talent. And we all have them. We've all got egos. Some are huge, some are little, but we've all got them. He would call us into the office, and instead of saying, Jetson, fired, he never gave us one of those fire and brimstone things. He'd call you in and he'd say, hey, and he'd list 5 things that he really liked about today's show. And you get feeling really good. You don't even see it coming. And then he says, and by the way, he says, this other thing you did, we probably want to rethink that and do that differently next time, or not at all. And that was our big spanking. But it was great working for him because he knew that yelling at people isn't going to get anything done, especially people with fragile egos. No, you're not going to get anything done yelling at them. Another character that did real well for me was Principal Prickly. Now, this was just, I don't know, maybe a bad Jerry Lewis impersonation it started out as, and then he just kind of became his own guy. But he always had some interesting things. And here's an example of Principal Prickly.
Attention, students. This is Principal Prickly with your daily announcements. Item number 1. The girls' gym teacher, Ms. Boldikis, will be holding tryouts for this year's girls' swim team. She says if you've got the shoulders of Martina Navratilova, then you're just what she's looking for. Tryouts are at 3:30 in the pool. The sex ed teacher, Ms. Tight Sweater, says that she'll be giving a lecture in the Howard H. Pepper Auditorium during lunch today. How to find a good jogging bra. Well, this isn't just for the girls, fellas. She's going to demonstrate both the correct and incorrect bras to buy. I'll be there front and center. No, really, I've marked the seat in the center, and it better be open when I get there. This has been Principal Prickly with your daily announcements. That is all.
One of the biggest coups that Mark and I ever pulled, we were asked to host a Bud Girl competition. Now, if you've never been to one of these, there are a bunch of girls in bathing suits around a pool at a hotel. And it was indoors. It was a little chilly outside, so we were all indoors on this indoor pool at the Holiday Inn or whatever it was. And there were dozens of girls parading around. And that didn't suck that much, I'll tell you that, because we didn't have to choose the winner. We just had to announce the name of the contestants and the winners. Well, Rich Esser owned True House of Munch at the time, and he was there, we were there. They did a great job of picking the winners. 2 beautiful blondes and a gorgeous brunette. Were I judging, I would have picked these 3. Rich came over to talk to Mark and me, and during the conversation, he told us he was taking the winners to the Bahamas to shoot a Budweiser calendar. And then he says, I'd like you guys to go. I said, gee, let me check my schedule. Okay, sure. And we told him we had to run it past Mama Nancy Diamond, the general manager of WIOT. And when we told Nancy, she said, no, you're absolutely not going. So we went back to Rich and said, hey, we're sorry, Rich. Nancy said no, but we sure appreciate the invite. And he said, bullshit. I'll talk to her. You're going. I spend a lot of money with WIOT. Well, a few minutes later, Nancy came up and said, you know what? I think it'd be a great idea if you guys went to the Bahamas. Like it was her idea and she hadn't just shut us down 5 minutes earlier. Well, on paper, this was such a bad idea, really, because I had only been married to Shelley, my first wife, for about 3 months. And now I'm going to tell her that I'm off to the Bahamas. Oh, but we won't be alone. There's going to be 15 Bud girls there, too. Oh, brother. Anyway, we lucked out. It turned out to be an official station-sanctioned edict that we go to the Bahamas. So the Toledo 3 were Rhonda, Sandra, and Tamra, and they were striking beauties, each of them. Now, then we had Mark, me, Rich Esser, Rick Nieheis, and another guy from True House, and we're in the Bahamas with our 3 girls. Then the other girls start arriving. Are you kidding me? I'm getting paid for this. The other companies didn't send any male representatives. It was just us with 15 bud girls and 5 guys. Now, I think Rich could have bailed out GM with the cash that he had on him most of the time. But we traveled by limo everywhere. We went to a casino, and I was sitting at a blackjack table with the Toledo 3, and Rich just walked up with his hands overflowing with chips, dumped them on the table, and said, "Have fun, kids." On the second night, Rich decided to only get 1 limo, which meant we'd have to limit the number of girls going with us. And he told me to round up any 10 girls I wanted to invite that night. So I knocked on a few doors, handpicked the 10 girls, and the Toledo 3, of course, because we were a group. And we went to dinner. The things you have to do to keep a client happy. I sure hope WIOT appreciated the sacrifice we were making for the greater good of the station. Anyway, we get back. August Bush IV, little Auggy Doggy, had seen the pictures of the girls, and he kind of had the hots for Rhonda. Rich had rented the Bijou, which was an old theater they turned into a nightclub. So we had our 3 bud girls there. Rich comes in, and he buys the whole house around. They all get Budweiser on Rich. That was an expensive gesture right there. And earlier in the week, Rich knew Auggy Bush was coming, so he had True House of Munch scrubbed up and painted, and it looked great. Well, August never stopped by there. He just went right to the bar, went right to Rhonda, and now he's dragging her out of the bar. They take off, jump in a limo, and leave. And then, I don't know, not even 5 minutes later, August Bush is back in the bar. He's now grabbed Tamara. He's dragging her butt up the aisle, and they disappear. Then the phone rings. It was Rhonda. She was crying. I said, "What's the matter?" She goes, "August got an adjoining room, and we're in the limo going back to the hotel, and he said that we got adjoining rooms and that I can stay with him and that he's going to take me back to St. Louis, and we're going to do a poster and all this stuff." And I told him I wouldn't sleep with him, and he stopped the limo in the middle of the street and told me to get out. I said, "Rhonda, where are you?" She said, I walked back to the room. I said, "Okay, I'll be right there." So I haul ass over there, and now I've got this beautiful, gorgeous girl snotting on my shoulder. She's crying. And surprisingly, I didn't really mind. Anyway, we're sitting there, she's sobbing, telling me her story, and then we hear the door close in the room next to us. Well, that was the adjoining room that he'd been talking about. So we opened the door between us to listen. And so we're sitting at the door, and she's trying not to cry out loud, and all of a sudden we heard August say, "I've been a bad boy. You better spank me." And she gives him a little smack. And then she says, "I've been a bad girl. You better spank me too." And we hear, "Crack! Yow!" Oh, man, he gave her a good shot. And Rhonda and I are biting our hands, trying not to laugh. We had to pull away from the door and close it. So, yeah, I got to hear Auggy Bush get a spanking from a bud girl. Well, let's end podcast number 9 right there. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time on Losing My Mind.